Welcome to Dean's Office Hours. I am so excited. This is almost like the closing ceremonies for application week. I hope you have had as great a time this week as I have. We are joined today by the Assistant Dean of MBA Admissions and Financial Aid, Kirsten Moss. So just to give a little rundown of what we're going to be doing today, easy outline. We're going to quick welcome from their introductions. So we've already knocked that welcome out. We're going to have a discussion, a fireside chat. I love these conversations. I get the honor of getting to work with Kirsten, but every time we host one of these, I learn something new and I leave with that little aha moment that I'm like, oh yeah, maybe we could try that. Let's do something a little different. And then we'll definitely use the Q&A box. So as I said before, please ask your questions there. We also have a team of folks online who will be helping behind the scenes. We'll have about 50 minutes together. And just so everybody knows, these videos will be posted. There's going to be a little bit of a short turnaround. Some of our events from the beginning of the week are already posted. So if you want to come back to these ever to refresh on some different ways to maybe kickstart your process or find moments of inspiration to get you to that end of that application and to click submit, we are here for it. And we will always be there at your fingertips. So I'm going to go ahead and stop screen share. Kirsten, I know I might have spoiled your intro a little bit, but could you please introduce yourself? And in similar spirit to the question we asked attendees, how about if you could fill in the blank, one of your professional goals is, and then
Great. Thank you, Will. And thank you for the delightful introduction. Just as it's inspiring to read about all the students, the applicants who are out there and what you're passionate about, it's fun to be here and share my own. So Will, in answer to your question, I feel so fortunate that I love my job. So my post-professional goal, or my goal right now, is to keep this job. So keep your fingers crossed that I'll have it for a long time. But more specifically, one of the goals that I know both of us share and is so important in the last few years, Will and I have been talking about how do we really make our process as transparent as possible so that whoever is applying can put their best foot forward. And little by little, we've been trying to crack this nut. So I'm really excited today to have this final session as we continue to just make it as easy as possible for anyone listening today to get to the next step in your own journey. And hopefully, you'll consider Stanford. What can we do to make sure that you understand how to get here?
Yeah, it's funny how even from our first discussions and then as we've seen things evolve, um, how we've absorbed and are kind of living that change lives, change organizations, change the world
So true.
philosophy. Just kind of something that you absorb even by working at the GSB. So watching it happen with our students is that much more special.
Yeah, and this is really the first time that we've ever had an application week like this before. So huge shout out back to Will for his brainstorm and the entire team who's put this together. We're so excited to deliver it.
Yeah, and like we're talking about both programs, but even internally, we're always thinking about how we can improve the things that we do and what we offer, including the application. I know you've led our team in like that design process. And I want to know, like, can you provide any insights into your goals, especially as a leader with your vision for where we go next? What are your goals for the application and evaluation process?
It's a great question in a way, Will, that brings us, it's so easy in the application because it's complex, or how we evaluate to get down in the details, who's your reference, who's the best person to do that, or how do I do my resume? But one of the things that I've tried to think a lot about at the highest level is where are we aiming for when we built this evaluation system and the application? What was really the end goal of what we're trying to do? And if we get very simplistic for anybody listening, hopefully this will help you as you're writing your own applications. There's really three things that I think are most important to us at Stanford. And one is we're an educational institution. So the number one thing is we're trying to find students who are going to be engaged in that classroom. And maybe all of you can reflect for a moment, like go back to university or even high school. Was there a class that you just loved, that you felt alive in, where everyone's hand was up? And what was the teacher like? And how did you show up? That's what we're trying to, the admissions team is trying to find is students who will come into our classrooms and not only share their own perspectives, but be this curious and excited to learn. And our faculty, it'll feed on itself. So one of the priorities I'm always holding as we design our application and process is how do we make sure we're getting that data so we can find students who really appreciate learning for learning's sake. So that's one. And then the second thing Will already mentioned, our tagline of change lives, change organizations, change the world. In some ways that can sound, I don't know, high and mighty, like too hard to achieve. The reality is every time we pick up an application, we're looking for people who will have positive impact when they go out there and graduate. And it's actually hard. We struggle, we refine this application all the time because it's not as if we're in a company. Let's say you're in consulting right now and you interviewed, there's some skills that someone who's a consultant needs to have. For us, we want leaders to go out across the globe in every industry, and whether it's for-profit or nonprofit, education, it could be journalism, media, finance. So how do we find those characteristics that really help people have leadership impact no matter what they aspire to do? Or I love whoever said that they want to build a company that'll spread love in the world. Like, how do I find just that person who's got the capability to spread love in the world? So I'd say that's the second thing that we're looking for is this evidence that you will go out and impact the world in a positive way. And then third, and really important for Stanford, so I'm reminded of this often, our community is small. What you'll hear our alumni and students and faculty say is that it's a place where in Silicon Valley, where our goal is to lift everyone up. It's to fail and fail often, but to really be thinking beyond oneself. And so I'm looking when I read applications to find evidence of, and to ask you data about how I'm hoping to see that you will come and strengthen our community, that you will be someone who, again, will make us will not only develop themselves, but help in the development of others. And you can do that in so many ways, but that's what's special about Stanford is we're all working together. And I think it's special about innovation and entrepreneurship, in the valley, the ecosphere we come from is really that we solve things with each other. You can't do it alone. So I'd say, Will, those at the very top are my goals. And then it's not surprising that when we publish on the web what we look for, it maps to that. You'll see, and I'm sure if you've attended to another session, we talk about intellectual vitality, that's that engagement, what you'd be like in the classroom. We talk about demonstrated leadership potential, which is really the past impact you've had. So what have you done out there in the world that we can look to? And then personal qualities and contributions. So how have you gone through the world? What are your values, the choices you've made, how you've shown up to, and from that, we're looking at what that would mean for you to come to our community and help us be stronger.
Yeah, and there's been a phrase that I used once and somehow it stuck, background agnostic, context dependent.
Oh, I love it.
So for
Well,
folks out there, we can dig into
yeah,
this a little bit more, but I
yeah.
know in the past I've had questions from people like, I'm from a non-traditional background, or I'm from, X, like, how do I demonstrate, right? And so as you think
Mhm.
about intellectual vitality, like that can come in so many different facets of your life. And for us, it doesn't matter where it shows up. We celebrate it where it does. And then context, right? Like how it's going to show up. Maybe in that individual who's a consultant, it might look very different from someone who's
Sure.
helping lead a family business. So just know that for
Yeah.
folks out there, like it is about you and like the world around you.
And would it be helpful to even go one level deeper on that, Will, and explain? So dive down. I love that you brought up that one first, this intellectual vitality, because if with the other ones, it might be easier for us to say, well, that's what we're looking for. So then when we built the application, where do you as a applicant demonstrate those things? But I always find the intellectual vitality almost the hardest because you can find it anywhere. And I think one of the myths is we're just looking at GPA and test scores. In reality, we're looking for evidence that you've had interesting ideas. Fundamentally what leaders do, if we think about that, leaders are influencing others to collaborate towards a common goal. And part of that may be having a good idea about how to solve a problem. So it could be just as much in the day-to-day work that you're having now, where you thought of something someone else hadn't, or someone shared an idea and you jumped on it to help that team move in just a little different direction. mean, I would say intellectual vitality, Will gets the gold star on our team this week, because this is a great example of us just talking as an institution, as a team, and saying, hey, we want to be more transparent. How can we really be helpful in beginning to see a new way that we might do something? So we'd love to see in your application, it might come from your references, it might come in your short answers, it might come from the kinds of things you studied on your transcript, but those are all places where you can demonstrate that you're curious and engaged and thinking and about new ways to do things.
Yeah, and as we're talking about things popping up across kind of the whole application, just the concept of the holistic review process, I've talked a lot about it this week. I think people have heard my explanation for it, but it would be really nice to hear how you articulate and understand the holistic review process. I know I've talked about like, the application, and each section is like a part of the picture, and each helps us understand like who you might be in our classroom and community. And things are judged, like we're making assessments on the whole and not just on any one piece. Like how would you explain it to someone if they
Yeah.
ask you, what is the holistic review process?
I think you just teed it up well, Will, in that you can't make a decision on any applicant from just a part of the application. But it's easy to be up here, and I know many schools say holistic and just go, well, what does that mean? Tell me more about that. So I think if we go back to what I just said about the goals, that we're looking for someone who's engaged in the class, who's done positive things in their community, and who also will help to, make a positive community wherever they are. Like those should be your guiding north. But we have to look across your essays, which are going to it'll shed light on who you are and the choices you've made and what you care about, as well as our short answers, which tells us like what you have done. And then looking at some of the other, as I said, for intellectual vitality, we can find it in different places. We are looking like a heat-seeking missile through all of this as we read. And there's no, like I was laughing, Will, as I was thinking about our talk today. If someone asked me, like, how do you read an application? I feel like every time I read an application, it's different, because as I'm going through, maybe I'll start with your biographical information. I'll immediately have a question that comes up, and maybe it is about intellectual vitality, and I'll jump to your transcript or over. So I'd be happy to share a little bit more about how that works. But the point is, it's holistic. You need all of these parts in order to come up with a good assessment at the end of the day.
There have been a lot of questions about process. So I wanted to make sure that we spent some time today too. So this is kind of like the perfect segue.
Awesome.
People have been curious about the process. So any light that you could shed into it, and then understanding like, okay, to what extent is understanding our process valuable versus like, how can we focus our energies such that we can show up our best selves in the application?
So that's a great question. And maybe I can give some examples even of how I read applications to bring it more to life. But at the top level, what the admissions team, all the admissions officers and I are trying to do is we're trying to give you real estate so that you can tell your whole story. And we've even given you these optional questions to make sure you have enough space to do it. So rest assured, we're going to be considering that in its entirety. And for each person, you might want to use that space in a little bit of a different way. But don't think that there's more important information put in one place or another, because it will vary so much by person. So I would not get hung up at all about how is Kirsten going to read my particular application. I would be thinking much more about how can I make sure that she knows, that I'm curious. She knows about my stories I'm most proud of, the impact, what I've done. And also she knows who I am as a person, he or she, I should say. Okay, when I read applications, I'll try to think of some examples, real examples. And I've read thousands, so hopefully this will be easy, Will. So usually I will start at the very beginning of the application you're going to fill out, just to get a sense of who you are in terms of where you were born and where you're going to school and some of that biographical information. But oftentimes, even from there, I'm taking leaps into other parts of the application. So for instance, maybe I'm getting where you went to school and what you studied, and you studied classics. And then I see, oh, you're at Citibank. And that'll be like, wow, how did that happen? And before I want to learn more about Citibank, I'll probably jump to your transcript and say, what did you study? Did you have any finance or quant courses? Because holistic, to use your phrase, the way that you perform or what you worked on at Citi may be very different from someone in the beginning, at least, of your career than someone who spent 4 years as a business or economics major. So that might be a good example of how we're constantly asking ourselves questions. Or maybe if I see in that information about college that you paid for a significant part of your college, or that you're first gen, I might immediately jump to your essay then and think, wow, that must have been really hard. Were there other things in your context that and how you've grown up that might shed light or a lens on the choices you've made, or the transcript, or the classes that you've taken, all of that. So it'll be really individual for each person. But I would think about telling us from your perspective, how can you be most strategic to answer those goals, those 3 goals I gave you. Was that helpful, Will? Help me
Yeah,
out here.
and I think that also starts to come into, like, there's a question from Bruce about the mission
Yeah.
and values that the admissions committee holds and what guides our decision-making process. And I think for us, it is that understanding, and not just the projection of ideas and notions, but also evidence. So every time we're reading, we're looking for in the application, oh, here's where intellectual vitality, like some form of intellectual vitality might come to life. And maybe it is in your writing, maybe it's in a letter of reference. So I think that evidence piece of it, kind of on the
Mm,
tactical, practical, the better folks are able to articulate not just the what, but the how. I think
yeah.
that's one of those on the practical side of things that help guide us. And okay, let's make a coherent, yes, look to admit kind of decision,
Yes.
like evidence.
We're looking for those patterns of evidence. And I want to caution, as you're thinking about in the next 5 weeks putting together, for those of you who are thinking first round, putting together your application, I love what Will said about being agnostic about where you've done it and the context. What I would start with is, when we think about especially that demonstrated leadership potential piece, what are the things that you've done in your life that you're most proud of? So if we get to sit together tomorrow, we're having a cup of coffee, and I get to ask you the question, Bruce, tell me about a time that you've had an impact that was meaningful to you. Really thinking, what have I done that I've worked on, not what's important to Kirsten? Because I speak over and over with prospects who think that they needed to be the president of the student body, or they needed to go to a certain school or a certain kind of company. And the reality is, going back to that last example, if you're the first person in your family who was able to go to college, or you ended up having to pay for a third of your college, to me, that's leadership, that's persistence, that's grit, that's taking risks, that's showing initiative. So if you start with yourself, because you understand your context better than any of us could, and don't project what we want to hear, what have you been working really hard on? And I believe each of us has some stories that are powerful. And just making sure, at least for Stanford, we can't speak for other schools, but at Stanford, that's where we're seeing leadership come to light.
And so as we're talking about like the application and how we
Mhm.
can put our best foot forward, this whole week has been about tips, advice, best practices. So is it okay if we go in that direction, Kirsten?
Mhm.
Okay. Knowing that between the two of us,
Yeah.
thousands of applications, and even talking to our teammates, right? I want to say there's at least a century of admissions experience across the
That's
team,
true.
if not more.
Yeah, yeah.
So hopefully some of our observations come with, some backing there. But
Awesome.
this week we split even our workshops into how do you start your story? How do you communicate it in the written format? And then when it comes to speaking, because speaking is also going to be not just part of the application process, but a consistent part of the journey throughout. So maybe starting at that starting your story. So for folks who might be thinking about business school,
Mhm.
or really trying to put together like the threads and the details of maybe why, like, do you have any tips or advice for folks and things that they might consider um, as they're pulling together like the rationale for business school, or for Stanford?
So that why Stanford question, is that what you're speaking about
Yeah, or just,
specifically,
yeah,
Will?
just
Yeah.
broadly as people are preparing. So
Yeah. Um, Really, when I think about the essays and short answers you're writing, for me, they fall into those 2 camps, which is, what have you done? And we just talked about that. That would be really starting with, what are you proud of the impact that you've had? And I'm going to pause there again too, because this impact could be very individual to you as well. Maybe you're a violinist and you've worked really hard and you performed in ensembles or in symphonies. Like, that may be the way that you're going to demonstrate leadership to us. Or maybe it's in your church or your mosque, or with your family, helping them. There's so many ways that you can show that, but think about what you've done. That's where I would start first, and reflect and jot down. And I use 3 stories because I want you to kind of have a chance to play with that and brainstorm, think outside of the box, because it may be something that you're proud of that you wouldn't necessarily have led with, if that makes sense. So that's part A. The second part that we talked about was how you've walked through life, who you are as a person, what are your values and motivations. And our essay about what matters most and why gets to the absolute heart. And it's probably one of the hardest essays you're likely to answer. That's the hard news. For me, that gets to, I think, one of the easy, you've probably gotten a lot of advice, but for me personally, if I had to put in my 2 cents on that, if you could look back over the last, since college, for many of you, that's 8 years, you've made choices. You've decided what to major in. You've decided what extracurricular activities you've been involved in. You've decided what types of organizations to work for post, potentially, if you have had work experience. And at the time, you may not have thought very much about why you're making these choices, but now you have an opportunity to go back and connect the dots and see what those themes are. I know I was working or speaking with a candidate recently, and they're telling me about what they had done in college. And they had been an RA in their college dorm. They had been a TA for a teacher in some courses. They'd done that twice. They had signed up to be a wellness counselor. And immediately we're seeing this theme that, whether it was in academics or in living situations or even on the wellness side, of just helping people develop and grow. And that's like, well, there you go. That's a big aha. So maybe you can look over your choices and think about what's been important to you and why you've made them. And you'll start to understand, what those deeper values are. So that's that would be the advice I'd give on the essay as well.
Yeah, there was a kind of preparation tip process that I shared with people: remember, reflect, process, connect. Just remember the things you
Love
did,
it. Yeah.
reflect on like the circumstances around it, process, like how did that kind of matter and why was it significant, and then connect the dots between the different parts of your life and how might it informed your journey.
Yeah.
So hopefully I was trying to put it in a catchy phrase that people could remember if they're like, okay, if I need to sit down, what's an easy way to think and prepare about with some of the things that I've done? So kind of plug in that mnemonic
Yeah,
in
I
there as
love it.
well.
I totally love it. I love your mnemonics. I'm going to steal that next time I'm in another group.
Do it.
And maybe what's also important is to go back to the why. Like, why does Stanford ask this question? We've been asking it at least for 2 decades, and I'm not going to change it. So if you're going to apply in a year or 2, you'll still have the luxury of doing this question. There has been tremendous research on looking at leaders later in their journey, what prompted their impact or prompted the results that they were able to achieve. And one of the distinctions that we see is leaders who know what their values are and can speak to their motivations tend to use that as the energy to take risks and to take initiative. So we're looking for you to reflect on what could those motivations be, and that will help you help guide yourself in the future. Now, Will and I are not going to evaluate what values you have. So this is a projective question. For us, it's more about your self-awareness and reflection and knowing who you are and could be as a leader, so that when you come to Stanford, you're ready to take advantage of all the opportunities we have here. And go ahead, Will, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's almost like you're kickstarting that leadership development and leadership curriculum, because there's so much introspection that's required to answer, why should someone follow you? Or why should
Yeah,
someone want to follow you, to be even
exactly.
more precise? I really appreciate the question. I've mentioned it before, like I often use it as a kind of way to make decisions when I'm at pivot points in life, even. So even beyond the application, I think in embracing the process of applying, there are some greater learnings that can be had, which
Yeah.
oftentimes, and the way I grew up, it's like you apply for a thing and then that's it. Whereas in this process, there's also, it's an invitation for greater learnings that I never realized could have been part of something like applying to school before.
Yeah, and I love that. And it's also our second essay, why Stanford? What are your aspirations and how will you get there? It's the same. It's we're asking you on the one hand to look back at what your motivations were, and then to use those to tell us what you might be interested in working on or solving in your future. I think it's worth saying, and this is different than other schools, so I really want to make sure we're just speaking for Stanford. We don't have career services sitting on our admissions committee. We really believe if you get into Stanford that you are capable of achieving whatever dreams and aspirations you have. That won't happen necessarily immediately. Maybe there are pivots or expertise you have to gain, but we know that you'll get there. So you should feel free to write about whatever you want in those aspirations. And we also know that those are going to change. The vast majority of our students think they'll do something when they come in, and will do something very different when they graduate, and that's okay too. So again, this is a question to say, have you thought enough about what you care about that you can have a true north, even though it might shift west or east and you'll go through this journey, but we're really curious about at this moment in time, what's important to you, and what would you like to work on?
Yeah, because even if it's not the first thing after, there's probably going to be at least a few pivots in your lifetime.
Right.
This is just one stop in a career and life, basically, that extends beyond. Yes, you will take the memories and community and the learnings from the GSB with you, but it's really to empower you to be able to thrive regardless of your circumstance and situation, I think.
Yeah.
Right. And then so we often talk a lot about the writing, the essays, an area that I know we both find fascinating. That we don't get to talk too much about is the interview. And
Yeah.
I know you have a really rich history and assessment. Can you talk us through like the Stanford behavioral based interview? Any advice that you might give for folks and how to think about what it looks like?
Yeah. Yes. Well, for us, we will interview somewhere between 10 to 15% of our applicants. So if you get the email inviting you to interview, congratulations. That's a wonderful step in the process. Our interviews are done by alumni across the globe. So they'll have your resume and not your whole application. So it's your chance to share with them in a little bit more detail their story. But let's go back to your question, Will. Why do we structure the way our interviews and the way that we do? They're behavioral based structural interviews, and what they're meant to do is to really take this application, which isn't a flat piece of paper, to bring it to life. It's your opportunity to really bring it to living color. And we basically will ask you the same questions that you're answering in your short answers. Tell us about a time you've had an impact that was meaningful, or tell us about a time you've had a challenge. Tell us about a time you've worked on a team. And notice that tell us about a time language. That's very typical of behavioral based interviews for those of you who have not done them. What we're trying to do here is we believe that your past behavior will predict future behavior. So you've had an opportunity in your application in the essays or short answers to tell us about some of those stories that you think are important and you're proud of. But when we're reading an application, we don't have a chance to probe and really bring those to life. So what could be a good example? To really, I'm going to play this is an interview, Will, to really make this concrete and the why behind what we're trying to do here. Let's say that many of our applicants come from finance. Maybe you were asked to help build a training program or launch a new initiative on training for new analysts that are coming in, and you give us a short answer question about that, maybe 200 words. So that's a really exciting leadership, I'd call it, impact moment. But maybe your interviewer, when he asks you a question, like, tell me about a time you've taken initiative, you lead with this example. And the interviewer might want to know, oh, well, how many students attended that? Or how long was the training program? Or how did you get permission to do it? Or the resources? Or how did you develop the curriculum? So all of these things we may or may not have been able to ask you about in a flat application, but in your interview, you can bring it to life. And I think, so these interviews, in some ways, you won't have a lot of additional preparation because you've already been thinking about those important stories. But I want to make sure, because I do some of the interviews as well, one potential, what do I call it, or a tip, something to avoid, is make sure when you come to the interview, you know that you're the hero. And heroes can be humble. So as you come in, really think about, what was a situation, you saw there was a problem and that new analysts weren't getting the training they needed. What did you do about it? So what actions did you as an individual take? why was that important? Why was that meaningful to the organization? So what happened from it? And be willing to step in that and be the hero. And again, heroes can be humble, but you still need to own, this was what I did in this initiative. So that's the best way I think you could prepare for our interviews.
I was laughing because I thought you were going to ask me to like demo with you. I'm glad we didn't. We did. Yeah, I did a improv yesterday.
Yeah.
One of the tips I shared yesterday, and kind of in jest in the phrasing, there's no I in T, but there is an admit. I was joking, but
Yeah.
the point was, even in a group setting, there's something that you might have done as an individual, and there's something you did do as an individual to help advance something from point A to point B.
Absolutely.
And for a
Yeah.
lot of us, it's hard to shift out of that we mentality and embrace and like really center yourself. I know I
Yeah.
remember one of our interviews, Kirsten,
Oh
and
no.
even having done interviews myself, you were like, Will, you keep saying we. What did you do? And even though it was an example I knew like you were actually involved in, I was like, oh, wait. So definitely it's a real thing. And we encourage you and we want to know about you. So just we invite you to center yourself in your anecdotes.
Right. That's fantastic advice. Absolutely right. And oftentimes it took a group to get things done, but just like you said, Will, you were taking actions that helped that group. So speak to those.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And if we do probe, it's because we want to learn more and we're trying to help you get towards some of the
Yeah.
detail that will be helpful for us as we understand your application as a whole.
And the other thing is, we are blessed on our team. Carrie Oliver has been running our interviews for a long time. She's trained hundreds of alumni across the globe. They love to participate and come back every year. So a part of this too is just to meet someone who really cares about Stanford and who wants to get to know you and you them. So once you're done with behavioral based part of the interview, there'll be a wonderful moment at the end where you can ask some questions, learn more about Stanford. And that's again, just the time to be yourself, relax, develop rapport, get to know someone new.
Yeah. Carrie has been such a gift to the program. Like it has really shined, I think, in the recent years. Um, Kind of shifting away from the application now. So we've kind of moved through the process, like how do you think about it? How do you prepare? We talked about essays, that interview, which is that next step as part of the holistic process. But again, this is just one step along the journey. And, you know, we
Mm.
want to make sure that you're going to thrive at business school. So having seen so many journeys through, do you have any tips for folks whom to help them hit the ground running once they're at school and really maximize the opportunity, kind of with a notion that like also as you're preparing for business school, that's also, during that, that's what we're looking for in the application process as well. So how can someone actually set themselves up for long-term success and really think about the big picture here, not just the application?
Yeah, Will, it's so easy to get caught up with all these deadlines coming and essays and everything else to just be like, I get this done. We have designed our process to try to help you reflect and be prepared for business school. One thing I may say is most of you in the audience have had, I'm guessing you went to college, had that experience. Now you've been working for several years, and there's been more of a path about what do I have to do to succeed? And this is probably one of the first times in your life where there are no more boxes to check necessarily. The world is open for you to figure out what do you care about? What do you want to work on? What's your own, how are you going to find energy to show up every day and be excited about what you're doing? So it's as you think about this transition, your job as you're coming to business school is not to, obviously it's to do well in the classroom and get involved, but it's also to really uncover for yourself what will be most important to you when you graduate to begin working on. And there are so many opportunities at Stanford and at other schools for you to sample whatever expertise you want to develop. And it's across disciplines for us. So it could be in any of the graduate schools, whether you have an interest in healthcare, education, or policy, the world is an oyster. So I hope during this time and over the summer as you transition, one of the things you can do is begin to think, what would be my priorities? What do I want to learn more about? What do I want to dive into, even though I know that will evolve? So when the world is completely open, I have some way to prioritize what could be most important to me. So I'd say coming up with a list of what those, it's in your probably what are your aspirations. That's probably helping you to get that list. So that's one. Two, rest. What we hear from folks coming in our first term is the classes are hard, and they take a lot of time, and there's all the social things happening. So really knowing, even though some of you may be in roles right now where you work extra hard, I've heard from folks in finance, they work weekends and all of this, but I've heard from those same students when they come in that it was just as intensive, that those first few terms here, in a different way, maybe a little more fun at times, but certainly intensive. I'd also, another tip is look at your quantitative preparation, and as an applicant as well. So some of you have had lots of exposure to that in the past. For those of you who haven't, if you haven't taken statistics or economics, micro or macroeconomics, or calculus, those will be core skills that I shouldn't say calculus necessarily, but some kind of higher level math. Those are going to be skills here that you'll need to rely on even in that first term. So before you're applying, if you notice that you have not had some of that classwork, you might want to speak in additional information about what kind of prep you will be getting. Something like an MBA math could be helpful, but you want to make sure when you get here, you have some understanding of the fundamentals of those topics. And then I think last, and my most favorite thing to say is, we get so excited, Will and I, about getting you to Stanford and kind of falling in love with your application, and we can't wait to meet you. You also, if you're selected, there's so few spots, I guess I would say, there's a responsibility to think about how you're going to also as a leader show up and help build this community. And it's never too early. You can start over the summer thinking about your classes you want to take, but also what's going on in campus and what problems, or not problems, I should say, but what are some of the ways that you can become part of the community in a deep way. And that often means stepping in and taking initiative to support others, help others. So I'd love for you, if I could give that advice, to be thinking in the summer, and actually it's whatever program you go to, that this is a chance to start your own sort of personal leadership journey and begin to help and build others up over the next 2 years in a really safe place that will, and those kinds of commitments and investments will last, again, over a lifetime. You'll be part of the Stanford community for 40 years or 50, as long as you're, as long as you're alive. So whatever connections and investment you're making now will pay dividends for all of us in the future.
Yeah, and I want to add maybe one more, like we're talking about, we want you to succeed and thrive. And that also means it's okay to ask for help, like whether it is academic help, because you might have been out of school for a while and it's a different type of engagement and intensity than maybe in your work life. So it might be academic help, there's academic support, there's career help, there's also counseling and psychological services help, knowing that this is going to be a really intensive, demanding experience on multiple fronts. And sometimes it helps to have someone to talk to who gets it and can help guide you through the process. So it's okay to ask for help. We want you to ask for help. And there are multiple spaces that can be support networks to make sure that maybe even if it's not the journey you thought it would be, we are still making progress and moving towards whatever goal it is you have. So I just want to make sure that's also risen to the top here.
Great, Will.
Yeah. And then kind of full circle, like people are on campus, we have students. I know sometimes folks say like, nobody gets in. We have a class. Like we say sometimes the only surefire way to not get admitted is to not apply. But to that effect, like what are some of the reasons you've heard from admitted students about why they almost didn't apply? What were some of the things that held them back? And then, ultimately they made it through.
It is remarkable, Will. And I don't know if it's because we all have imposter syndrome at some level. All of us, is just deep in our hearts. But when I come to Admit Weekend, it seems like one of the most common refrains as I get to meet all our new students is, Kirsten, I almost didn't apply. They start with that. And it's for so many different reasons. So even for those who were admitting in the class, there's this feeling that it felt they had to be courageous to be able to share what we're asking and actually hit that submit button. But for me, it could be sometimes people say, well, I was from consulting or finance, and everybody applies from those, and I just didn't think I'd stick out. Or someone else will say, I'm not from consulting or not from finance, so you're not going to want to read my application. So even that is funny. Or, I didn't study business, so I didn't know whether or not I would fit in or you would be interested. Or I went to a community college or a state college, not an Ivy League, so I didn't think I would have a shot. What else? Or we have one conversation I remember, he was a pastor. He's like, you wouldn't believe that I really wanted to be a business person. So whatever your imposter is telling you, that little gremlin voice, know that none of these would be reasons not to apply. And many of the things I just talked to would add to kind of the diversity of your perspective in our class would be something we would look at as a positive, not a negative, a positive that you started at a community college and were able to, perhaps transfer or be able to graduate in the first place. So just don't stop yourself because you're the only one who can really hit that submit button.
Yeah, take that strengths-based approach. Here's what I contribute. This is who I am,
I
and
love it.
kind of share that
Yes.
with us,
Yes.
because then doors really do open.
And imagine me listening to, and I say it's a common refrain, how many students, I'm like, what if these students had not applied? It would be, I think, not only a tragedy for us in our class, but also the future of, our world in some ways, because we're really relying on you to go out and create this positive impact. So you're early in your career. The time is now to try to share yourself and take that risk.
Yeah. All right. So we do have some time left. I want to make sure we
Awesome.
do jump into that Q&A box. So here's one of the top voted questions from Yanan. And this is a question about like when it comes down to two individuals or two files, like if there's a close match, like how do we think through the decision-making process? And maybe even just taking it beyond like the hypothetical of we just have two, like what, again, just to kind of go over some of the things we talked about at the beginning, what are some of the things that folks can kind of make sure that they're thinking through to put their best foot forward?
Yeah. Hey, Will, this is an awesome question. And I've been doing a lot of the talking. So I'm going to switch gears and say, how about you take a first shot and I'll take a second? Because I wonder if we're even a little different in how we might.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those times where it helps to know that there is a committee, right? And it's not just
Mm,
one individual who's making a decision. There's multiple folks who are both taking a look at the individual as well as the wholeness of the class. And the decision-making process is going to actually change year to year based on the context of that class. So for me, it's hard to make a clear like X, these are the things we look for because there's so many different elements involved. Like it is the holistic review process. Um, so that is kind of my non-answer
mhm.
answer.
I love it. Yeah, it is yeah, and it's a tough question. I know, and Will's right that the decisions are made within the admissions committee. So it's not just the one voice who's looking at any application. I know for me, though, sometimes I'm trying to make, even when I'm looking at my own pool and trying to make recommendations on candidates, there might be two who feel very close. That's part of our job. I tend to go back in and I'll use what Will said before, like for this evidence, we know what our criteria are, and I'll really go back into the application again and remind myself of where I've seen intellectual vitality, or remind myself of the kinds of impact someone has had, or who they are as a person, and that helps ground me. And oftentimes both individuals could be really fabulous candidates. So I want everyone to know too. I advise to go wide on your MBA applications because luck isn't maybe the best word to use, but we have many more candidates than we could put in one class. So hopefully that makes you feel better, that it's never like, oh, I'll just take this one. It's always like, okay, I need to go in and really make sure that this is the right decision. On the same token, though, at any given moment, an application, could be looked at in different ways by different people. So you guys get the chance to try to apply to multiple places.
Yeah. And there's a question here that I'll actually take, Kirsten, if it's okay. And this
Yeah,
is from
yeah.
Danielle about, yeah, we haven't seen the whole team, but the idea of representation is something that
Mhm.
they think about, that also things that other underrepresented folks from underrepresented backgrounds, that, it's really important to have representation so they feel comfortable in the application process.
Mm.
I see you all are currently hiring an assistant director for outreach and diversity. How have you all committed to ensuring underserved communities have access to a degree program like this? And so
And you're hiring actually. So send your
I'm
resume to
smiling.
Will. Yeah, that's great.
That's actually my old
Yeah.
role. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about our office is that even though I might be stepping out of that position, I'm now like leading this team. That doesn't mean that I stopped doing that job. So now I'm able to help coach, mentor, and support whoever takes on that role. And now there's multiple people. Programs like application week and really shifting the way that we think
Mm.
about our programming so that rather than just telling you about the school, but giving tools and frameworks for better understanding of the application process. I like to think of that as closing that equity gap. That piece of equity being like the knowledge of how to apply. Sometimes it can feel like a black box. And if you don't know anybody who hasn't gone through it before, who has gone through it before, who do you turn to for help? And so that's one of the things I find so empowering and motivating about working in this office and being able to work with Kirsten is that we think a lot about how can we make sure this process is as open, accessible, and equitable as possible. And so Danielle, please know, and to everybody out there, we take this very seriously, and we are looking to support everyone out there so that you can all have a fair shot and opportunity to attend a school like Stanford or any other institution that you hope to go to. So just wanted to put that plug in there.
Yeah, and we'll all jump in. Thank you for asking that really important question, Danielle. I also look to the senior leadership of all of Stanford as well as the GSB, and it is one of the highest priorities of the school right now to make sure that our classes represent the diversity that's out there in our communities. And for me to have the honor of holding this position, we do take that very seriously. And hopefully you've seen on our web, we've been much more transparent about the backgrounds and the identities of the students that are coming in, and trying with opportunities like this and Will's broad shoulders and his teams and many other on our team, trying to increase the number of people and our pipelines of people who apply so that we can continue to make progress. And we have made some pretty dramatic progress even in the last 3 years in the diversity of our class, and are going to continue to fight, whether it's gender, ethnicity, I mean, all different kinds of diversity. So the fact that you're here is a really phenomenal sign, and we're glad you're part of the audience today. And hopefully these and other efforts will continue to make us successful on that front, because that's my job. I want the boardrooms of tomorrow to look like what our communities are, not to look like what they've looked in the past.
All right, Kirsten, we have the time flew by. We have a couple minutes.
Yeah.
If we can close out with some advice, words of wisdom, or words of encouragement that you have for the group, I think that would be an amazing way to close out application week.
All right, I will do this though, Will, only if you will close after my close, because you are one of the heroes of this week. I have such appreciation, so it'd be wonderful you do the final wrap. Is that fair?
Okay.
All right. All right. So I do this job fundamentally because I believe that each of us has potential, and many times we aren't given the resources, the confidence, even the self-narrative to know what we're capable of. And one of the things that I'm most proud about at Stanford is I think our program is designed to help people understand who they are, and again, get that confidence to really dream big, and then upon graduation, take the risks to make that happen. So for anyone out in the audience who does have things they believe that they're capable of that are bigger than themselves, and for anyone out there who might feel like, oh, but I don't know, it's time to take a step. And we have put on this application week for you. If you don't believe in yourself and begin there, no one else can or will. But know that Will and myself and the rest of our admissions team is looking forward to learning more about you, to honoring you. And no matter what happens, it is a step for you to start owning what you're capable of. So good luck, and I can't wait to learn more about you. On to you, Will.
To bring us home, I think Stanford is a place where people see possibility. They see possibility in themselves, in each other, the way that we're going to be able to tackle the world's biggest problems. It's like, yes, we can, and we're going to do this together. And I think this is encapsulated on the cornerstone. So I don't have the inscription up in front of me, so hopefully I get it right. But it's dedicated to the things that haven't happened yet and to the people who are about to dream them up. This is a place that's dedicated to you, your dreams, your ideas, the things that you want to do, the things that haven't happened yet that you might be the pioneer of, whether it is a new field or maybe just the pioneer of tackling that little problem that you've had that's been bugging you. And now let's look at it from a new direction. This is a place where we want you to dream big, lead boldly. So if there's one thing that I could say to all of you, it's dream big, y'all. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you had a great time this week. I know I did, and we'll hope to see you soon. Take care. And from the Stanford Graduate School of Business, We hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and we hope to see your application soon.